Hello, brothers and sisters. I'm Jesse with Living Tree Community Foods, and today we're going to be talking about loneliness, about how we've become a nation of strangers. From nature, from others, from our work, and from ourselves. So let's begin with estrangement from nature. We'll start with insects. Nothing shows as dramatically how far we're removed from nature in that insects throughout the world are declining at a dramatic rate. Overall, the mass of insects is said to be falling by a shocking 2.5% per year. According to an expert, it is very rapid. In 10 years, we will have a quarter less. In 50 years, only half left, and in 100 years, you will have none. At one time, all food was grown organically on family farms in concert with nature and surrounding ecosystems. All this has changed with the coming of industrial agriculture based upon chemicals and monoculture, growing acre and acre of only one crop at a time. In other words, a system of agriculture based upon synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and fungicides with very little diversity. Vast tracts across the U.S. are planted with corn and soybeans. Monoculture has played a major role in the decline of insects worldwide. And in this regard, let us tip our hat to ethanol. Between 2008 and 2013, wild bees have declined 23% in the U.S., particularly in the Midwest, Great Plains, and the Mississippi Valley, where grain production, primarily corn for ethanol, has nearly doubled during the same period. What greater estrangement can there be than using our precious topsoil to feed automobiles? And this despite record U.S. oil production. You figure it out, my friends. Ecosystems, species, wild populations, local varieties, and breeds of domesticated plants and animals are shrinking, deteriorating, or vanishing. The essential interconnected web of life on Earth is getting smaller and increasingly frayed, says Joseph Setzel, a German biologist and co-chair of a UN-backed report. Then there's estrangement from others. Let's ask ourselves, which one of us has a close friend, even one friend in whom they can confide? Have people ever been so isolated, distant, and remote? How sad are the streets. No one speaks. No one talks to one another. We are overwhelmed by a mass of things, and yet so impoverished. Facebook is a symptom of our impoverishment. All the likes on Facebook cannot compare with the warmth of a smile and a word of kindness and encouragement. Instead, there's the silence, the deafening silence of the streets. How rare for someone to walk up, smile, and say, "Good morning." Instead, out in the streets you see people hunched over their cell phones. Even when crossing a street, meet the iPhone, iPad, and iPod generation. They are the young Americans born since 1995, the first to spend their entire adolescence with smartphones in their hands. They spend more time in front of screens and less time interacting with one another than any previous generation. They communicate primarily online through social media or text, not in person. Is it any wonder then that they appear to be paranoid? Danger seems to lurk at every turn in the form of ideas that challenge their beliefs. They feel compelled to retreat to safe places. It's not only on college campuses, it's everywhere. How atomized we've become. Then there is the increasing polarization. Take a look at the chart. It shows that the share of the wealthiest 1% is heading towards 40%, while the share of the bottom 90%, that's us, is approaching 21%. No wonder that people are becoming increasingly desperate. And then there's estrangement from work. Consider a family farmer. He's the true husbandman of his soil, plants, and animals. They are an expression of his intentionality and devotion. Contrast this with a modern corporate monoculture where animals are raised in unspeakable conditions of filth and stench in what they called contained animal feeding operations. The animals are just factors of production. And then there's hydroponics. Instead of soil, plants and vegetables are raised in chemical soup. The farm has been turned into a factory. And then so too in factories per se, and in offices, there is the same isolation and the same despair. And this should not be. Work should be an expression of our highest powers, of creativity and innovation and consciousness. Instead, for most, it is a drear 8 hours to be gotten through each day. And then let's go to the fourth circle of estrangement, and that's from ourselves. The skyrocketing number of deaths of despair, which include record numbers of deaths from opioid overdoses, is the cry of a society that has become cut off from its roots. It is particularly sad that there is a surge in suicide among teenagers and young people. Loneliness and isolation are killing us. Tragically enough, millions of Americans, unable to face the moral and spiritual poverty of their lives, find no escape but into drugs. According to Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, a shocking scientific study published in the Annuals of Internal Medicine finds that 38% of Americans were prescribed addictive opioid painkillers in 2015. Millions more Americans are on psychiatric drugs, antidepressants, Satan drugs, and chemotherapy. A whopping 5% of American adults are currently abusing prescription opioids, and 1% of American adults are chemically addicted to opioids. The number of overdose deaths from pain medications has increased by more than 300% since 1999. According to the CDC, opioid drugs are killing 33,000 Americans each year. The opioid crisis has been making headlines, but then there's an older, more traditional one. 1 in 8 Americans, or nearly 13% of the population, struggle with alcoholism. From 2006 to 2010, in a 4-year period alone, excessive drinking has led to 88,000 deaths. And in addition, excessive alcohol increases the risk of chronic illness, including heart disease, liver disease, and cancer. And then there is obesity. In the U.S., more than a third of adults are obese. By 2025, in just 5 years, this could reach as much as 45%. Think of it. A nation half obese. And obesity, in our humble opinion, is also an epidemic of despair. It stems from despair and from depression. Never before in American history has there been anything like the epidemic of obesity, the epidemic of depression, the epidemic of opioids, the epidemic of suicides. This amidst a degree of social isolation and loneliness such has never before been seen. Is it any wonder then that the birth rate has plunged to a new all-time low? An image emerges of an America in its 244th year, drugged out, inebriated, and beset by senseless violence, with no refuge, nowhere to turn, nowhere to run from the all-pervasive loneliness. So we have then these levels of estrangement from nature, from others, from work, and from ourselves. But could it be that they are a sort of armoring, separating us from our true selves? Could it be that beyond the armoring, there is a core of aliveness in each and every one of us, vivacious, bubbling, and streaming aliveness? Though in most cases you would really have to dig for it. This core is also called the grassroots. And I am convinced we can get back. We can return. And I say to you, brothers and sisters, Why not begin with friends and neighbors? Why not create an edible schoolyard or community garden if you don't have one already? And why not? Why not a community fruit garden? Now is the time to plant a tree. Why not plant an apple, pear, peach, or plum tree? Yes, why not plant a tree to get in touch with the new birth of freedom Abraham Lincoln prophesied? Thank you very much indeed. My privilege to be speaking with you. Your comments and suggestions are so welcome.